He dismissed him as just the help, but when fire erupted under the hood, the truth came roaring out with it.
The sun beat down like judgment. It was the kind of summer heat that didn't just warm the skin. It pressed into bone, melted resolve, and turned every breath into labor. Out on the edge of a quiet southern town, a small mechanic shop stood, stubbornly against the heat, its tin roof radiating waves of shimmering air above it, like smoke signals from a world forgotten by time. Inside the open garage bay, the scent of burnt rubber, oil, and sweat lingered thick in the air. A radio played softly from a battered shelf, classic soul, the kind that only people with calloused hands still listen to. Darius Johnson worked with the precision of a man who had nothing to prove, yet everything to uphold. His dark skin glistened under the fluorescent lights. His gray coveralls rolled down at the waist, revealing a plain white t-shirt soaked with perspiration. He crouched beside an old pickup truck, one hand steadying a socket wrench, the other wiping his brow with the back of his arm. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if time didn't push him. Only excellence did. Darius had the kind of quiet presence that filled a room without raising its voice. And then came the sound that didn't belong. A low, throaty growl of a custom-tuned engine sliced through the hum of cicadas and the blues on the radio. A fire-red sports car, sleek, polished, arrogant, pulled up just outside the bay, tires crunching against gravel like a challenge. The driver door swung open before the engine had fully died. Out stepped Chase Whitmore, a golden-haired college kid with mirrored sunglasses and the smirk of someone who'd never once been told no, without laughter following it. He wore boat shoes, designer shorts, and a t-shirt that looked like it cost more than a month's rent in this part of town. Chase walked into the garage like he owned it, like it owed him something. "You the guy?" he asked, waving a thumb. Lazily toward the rows of tools and workbenches. Darius didn't flinch. He stood slowly, wiped his hands on a clean rag, and nodded once. "You having trouble?" Chase grinned. "Nah, just need someone to rotate my tires. Thought I'd give the local scene a shot, support the, community." He said the word like it tasted foreign. Darius glanced at the car, then at the kid. "That's a nice machine," he said evenly. "Looks custom." "Yep, Daddy had it imported last year. Tuned it myself." Chase paused. "But hey, if you scratch it, he'll have your business shut down before you can say lawsuit." There was no malice in Chase's voice, just entitlement dressed as humor. Darius didn't react. He moved toward the car, crouched beside the front wheel and ran his fingers near the inner tire wall, feeling the alignment with the precision of a surgeon. His eyes narrowed. "You've got more than tire wear here," he said. "You're fuel." "Lines rattling loose, that's dangerous." Chase laughed. "You serious, man? I just had it checked at a dealership upstate. You trying to upsell me?" Darius stood again, slow and calm. "Not upselling, just telling you what I see." "Well," Chase said, brushing imaginary dust from his shirt, "I think I'll pass on the sales pitch. Just the tires, thanks. Don't worry, I won't hold it against you." He walked back to a shaded bench outside and began tapping on his phone. Darius stared at the car for a moment longer before turning back toward his tools, face unreadable. Darius worked. His younger co-worker Miguel leaned in and muttered, "You should have told him off. Kid's a walking billboard for disaster." Darius just shook his head. "Let the road teach him, it always does." Outside, Chase chuckled at something on his phone and snapped a picture of the garage with a mocking caption. "When you let Yelp pick your mechanic." Inside, Darius tightened the last bolt, wiped his hands clean and rolled the car out slowly, eyes lingering for half a beat longer on the undercarriage. The sun hadn't moved much, but everything else had. 2 men, 2 lives, 1 intersection, and only one of them understood what was coming. It wasn't the first time Chase Whitmore had rolled up with the bass thumping hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. But something about this afternoon was louder, more obnoxious. The car door cracked open before the engine fully settled, and out came that familiar scent of too much cologne and too little humility. Chase wore mirrored aviators that reflected the garage like a carnival mirror, distorted, unreal. A friend trailed behind him, laughing at something on his phone, the sound sharp in the hot, quiet air. God, it's like stepping into the 1950s, Chase said, gesturing with exaggerated disgust toward the open garage. I swear, man, does this place even know how to handle a car like mine? It's not a lawnmower, you know. His friend chuckled. Bet they learned from YouTube. The joke hung in the air, not loud enough to be called an insult, but pointed enough to make its target clear. Darius didn't flinch. He was tightening a bolt on the undercarriage of a pickup, hands steady, back straight. When he heard the snide remarks, he didn't even look up at first. His face remained composed, expression carved from quiet stone. When he finally turned, there was no trace of annoyance, just that patient, practiced calmness that always made people like Chase uncomfortable. You back for those tires? Darius asked, his voice even. Chase gave a mock salute. And maybe a little mercy for my undercarriage. I hit a speed bump doing 70. Darius nodded, wiped his hands on a clean rag, and walked over. He didn't speak as he approached the sleek car crouching by the front passenger side. He reached beneath the chassis with a practiced motion, eyes scanning, listening to the way the metal echoed beneath his knuckles. Fuel line's not where it should be, he said calmly after a moment. Clamps loose. Could rupture if the pressure's too high, especially at speed. Chase barked a short laugh. Man, I literally just had a checkup at that dealership downtown. Don't think your, backyard tools are picking up what they missed. His friend snorted again, leaning against the car's spoiler. Dude, tell him to just do the tires. We've got places to be. Darius stood, wiping his hands again. I'm not saying this for the money, he said, looking Chase in the eyes. You ignore it. It might cost you more than a car wash. There was no threat in his tone, just something deeper, something grounded in experience, in a lifetime of seeing pride come before a crash. Chase crossed his arms. Let me tell you something, man. Just because you twist wrenches in a sun-baked garage doesn't mean you know this car better than I do. I've rebuilt this engine myself. Darius's gaze didn't waver. Then you should know a loose fuel line doesn't give second chances. But Chase wasn't listening. He turned back to his friend, flashing a grin that was all teeth and ego. Let's just do the tires, old school. We'll save the lecture for a TED Talk. Darius gave no protest. He nodded once, turned to his tools, and got to work. As he rotated the tires, he moved slower than usual. Not from hesitation, but with a weight in his shoulders that only dignity could carry. Chase kept chattering behind him, telling his friend about some party they were headed to, laughing about how he'd slummed it for the afternoon and barely survived. You know, the friend said, this place could make a killing just fixing busted scooters and lawnmowers. Darius didn't turn. He finished the job, double-checked the lug nuts, and lowered the car from the lift with a heavy sigh through his nose. He handed Chase the bill without a word. Chase pulled a black card from his wallet with a flourish and slapped it onto the counter. Do me a favor, he said, grinning. Don't charge me for the life lesson. No charge, Darius said, tone unreadable. As the transaction went through, Chase winked at his friend. Let's get out of here before I catch poverty. The engine roared back to life, echoing through the small lot like a final insult. Gravel kicked up as the red car peeled away, vanishing down the sun-scorched road like a bullet with no aim. Miguel, who had been quietly watching from the other bay, shook his head. Man's got a mouth bigger than his muffler. Darius didn't answer right away. He simply looked down at his calloused hands, then at the trail of dust left behind. He'll learn, he said at last, one way or another. The red sports car vanished into the horizon, swallowed by the shimmer of heat rising off the blacktop. Darius stood at the edge of the garage for a moment longer, his arms crossed loosely over his chest, his face a study in restraint. The sun baked the pavement, but the heat didn't reach the quiet cold settling in his chest. He turned slowly, returning to the underbelly of a rusted truck with a transmission that moaned louder than it moved. The clank of tools resumed, steady and unbothered, as if nothing had happened, as if the air hadn't just been sliced by arrogance and privilege disguised as confidence. Miguel, a younger mechanic with a quick temper and quicker mouth, was still muttering under his breath as he sorted parts. "Man, you should have said something. Put that kid in his place. He acted like you were nothing." Darius didn't look up. "I don't need to prove anything to someone who's already decided I'm beneath them. But you used to be somebody." Miguel protested, arms gesturing wildly. "You were an engineer, one of the best at that plant in Detroit. You designed, what was it, fuel efficiency systems for the Gen F line." Darius paused, his hand still resting on a wrench. He looked out into the garage, his eyes distant. Flashback. A younger Darius in a crisp navy blue shirt and safety goggles walked confidently through a bright modern automotive lab. Engineers huddled around CAD screens, test benches hummed with controlled chaos. Darius stood at the center, speaking with measured excitement about a new fuel-saving manifold design, surrounded by respect and potential. He wasn't just part of the machine, he was shaping it. End flashback. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, like a warm breeze whisked away by a cold front. "That was a lifetime ago," Darius said quietly. Miguel fell silent, sensing the calm wall that had gently but firmly gone up. Layoffs happened. Then Mom got sick. Then Dad followed. "I had to come home." Darius continued, his voice soft but steady. "Life doesn't always ask for your permission." He reached into the toolbox and passed Miguel a socket wrench. "Some lessons gotta be lived, not taught." Miguel nodded, subdued. He'd heard bits of Darius's story before, always in fragments, never complaints. There was no bitterness in the man, just a sense of grounded acceptance, like a tree that had survived too many storms to be shaken by thunder. Outside, the sun shifted westward, throwing long shadows across the lot. Meanwhile, Chase Whitmore grinned in the rearview mirror, sunglasses pushed up into his blonde hair as he revved the engine. The sports car surged forward along the back roads just outside of town, twisting through hills like a serpent. 3 of his friends followed in their own vehicles, music blasting, engines roaring in competition. "Let's see if the old girls—" "Still got it," Chase shouted over the noise, laughing. The engine responded with a snarl, but there was something off. The growl didn't sound smooth. It rasped, strained, like something was misaligned, like something deep beneath the hood was coming undone. But Chase, cocky and half-drunk on speed and youth, didn't notice. Or didn't care. They flew down narrow roads flanked by woods and fading light. Dust swirled behind them. Tires screeched around corners. He pushed harder. Back at the garage, Darius paused again, just for a second, as if something had passed through him. A flicker, a weight in his gut. He'd seen it before. Cars that looked fast but weren't built to be reckless. Drivers who thought they were invincible because no one had ever told them otherwise. "Kid like that," he said aloud, not to anyone in particular, "won't hear truth till it knocks loud." Miguel looked up. "You think something's gonna happen?" Darius simply returned to his work. Something always does when you don't listen. Back on the road, Chase sped into a tight curve, laughing as his tires skidded. His friends whooped behind him. Then, a sound. Not loud, but wrong. A hiss. A sputter. The acrid smell of fuel mixed with hot rubber. A warning that lasted only seconds. Then, boom, not. A full explosion, but a violent burst of fire and smoke from beneath the rear of the car. The engine coughed, choked, and the vehicle lurched as Chase slammed the brakes. Flames licked the undercarriage. He and his friends scrambled out, shouting. Phones pulled out for help, too late to stop the damage. Chase stood by the smoking wreck, shirt half untucked, mouth open, his ego scattered in the gravel with shards of carbon fiber. Back at the garage, Darius was cleaning up, the sun now low on the horizon. Miguel checked his phone and raised his eyebrows. That rich kid's car caught fire. Some kind of fuel leak, cops, fire trucks, everything. Darius wiped his hands one last time and tossed the rag into the bin. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't smile. He simply looked at the empty space in the garage where that red car had been earlier that day, and quietly said, "Told him the line wouldn't give second chances. It was late afternoon when Chase Whitmore decided to go for another joyride. The sky was brushed with streaks of orange and violet, the kind of backdrop that made everything look like a music video. His red sports car, polished to a mirror shine, purred impatiently in the driveway. Inside, Chase tossed the keys to one of his buddies and laughed. "Let's remind this town what real horsepower feels like." They piled into the car, 2 in the front, 2 more squeezed into the cramped back. The bass from the speakers pulsed through the leather seats, some trending playlist blaring like an anthem of youth and invincibility. The tires screeched as they peeled out of the Whitmore estate, headed straight for the back roads that carved through the outskirts of town. Chase didn't know, couldn't know, that today's ride would be different. As the wind whipped through, open windows and laughter echoed from inside the car. A faint smell crept into the cabin. Not quite smoke, not quite oil. A sharp chemical edge like gasoline warming on a stovetop. "Do you smell that?" someone in the back asked, wrinkling their nose. "It's just the engine working hard," Chase said, brushing it off. "This car's built to perform." But a flicker of unease darted across his face, too quick for anyone to catch. Darius's voice briefly echoed in the back of his mind. "That fuel line's not going to hold much longer." He shook it off. What did that mechanic know? Probably never even sat in a car like this, let alone owned one. They hit a sharp curve. Chase pressed harder on the gas, trying to make the rear tires chirp. The car groaned in protest. The smell grew stronger. Suddenly, smoke began to billow from beneath the hood. Thin at first, then thick and black, curling up the windshield like a warning signal. "Pull over," someone shouted. "Bro, something's wrong." I know. Chase snapped, fighting the wheel, eyes darting to the temperature gauge, which was spiking into the red. The dashboard lit up with angry warning lights. He slammed the brakes as the smoke began to seep into the car. The vehicle skidded to the shoulder of the road, dust kicking up in clouds around them. The moment the engine stopped, a silence fell. Achoo. Heavy electric stillness, then boom! A low, concussive blast from the engine bay sent a burst of flames licking out from under the hood. Glass cracked. Alarms blared. Heat surged around the car like a furnace door opening wide. Screams erupted. They scrambled out, coughing and stumbling away from the car, eyes wide with shock. Chase pulled one of his friends from the passenger seat just before the flames spread. To the tires, melting rubber and igniting debris. One by one, they stood there, watching the car burn. A sleek, overpriced machine reduced to a smoking skeleton in under 5 minutes. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance. Chase stood frozen, hands trembling, his mouth dry. His heart pounded in his ears, not just from the adrenaline, but from something else. A realization, a memory. He remembered the way Darius had looked at him, not angry, not bitter, just knowing. Calm in a way that now felt almost prophetic. He hadn't believed him. He'd called him a backyard mechanic, laughed, dismissed the warning, paid for a tire rotation and drove off like he was invincible. Now his precious car was nothing but ash and scorched metal. Later that evening, local news ran a segment. Car fire on County Road 17, 4 escape fiery crash. The footage was shaky, captured by a bystander. Flames shot into the sky. Firefighters hosed down the wreckage, and Chase's red car was barely recognizable. The reporter explained the suspected cause, a ruptured fuel line, a safety issue that had been flagged, but evidently ignored. Chase watched it unfold on the flat screen in his family's living room, the fire flickering in high definition. His friends had already left. The laughter was gone. His parents were out of town. He sat alone on the couch, the glow from the TV casting long shadows across his face. Gone was the smug smirk. In its place was something quieter, paler, humbled. He stared at the screen, jaw tense, replaying Darius's calm voice in his head. That line won't give you a second chance. He hadn't said it with spite, just with certainty, and he'd been right. Chase's fingers gripped the armrest tightly. For the first time, he didn't feel like the smartest guy in the room. He felt small. He felt lucky. Lucky to be alive. Lucky that the car exploded, But not before they got out. He exhaled slowly, staring at the screen as firefighters doused the last of the flames. Somewhere in the smoke, he thought he saw the faint outline of Darius's calm face again. Steady, unbothered. Good for the first time in his life, Chase wasn't laughing. 3 days after the explosion, Chase Whitmore's convertible sat in the back of a tow truck, blackened and twisted like a burned-out shell. But Chase himself wasn't in the driver's seat this time. He wasn't behind the wheel. He wasn't smiling. He stood outside Darius's garage under the harsh afternoon sun, his posture stiff and uncertain, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his jeans. The flashy sunglasses were gone. So was the cocky swagger. All that remained was a young man who looked far too small for the oversized ego he used to wear like armor. Cicadas buzzed in the silence between them as Chase hesitated at the entrance. Grease clung to the air, and the steady clink of metal echoed from the garage bay. Darius was bent under the hood of a rusted pickup, wiping sweat from his brow with a stained rag, focused, unhurried. Chase cleared his throat. "Hey." Darius didn't flinch, he didn't turn. He just kept working, methodical, calm, like the presence of the man who once mocked him was no more distracting than the summer heat. I wanted to say something." No reply. The clang of a wrench echoed as Darius tightened a bolt. Chase shifted on his feet. The silence was heavier than he expected. "I should have listened," Chase admitted, voice low, almost embarrassed. "About the fuel line." Darius finally straightened. He didn't smile, didn't smirk. He just looked at Chase, steady, unreadable. "You came back," he said quietly, brushing his hands on his coveralls. "That says something." There was a long pause. Darius walked over to his small desk at the side of the garage and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. Without a word, he handed it to Chase. Chase took it slowly, confused. "What is it?" "Just read it." Darius turned, away, already heading back to the truck. The conversation, as far as he was concerned, was over. Chase watched him walk, stunned by the calm dismissal. He opened the envelope with slightly trembling fingers. Inside was a printout, his car's original inspection report. He recognized the layout: make, model, date. There it was, clearly marked in red ink near the bottom: fuel line, fracture. Near injector valve, risk of combustion. Below it, scrawled in sharp looping handwriting, was a note: "I warned you without speaking. Maybe now you'll learn to listen." Chase stared at the paper, heat blooming in his cheeks, not from the sun, but from a cocktail of shame and realization. He remembered Darius's expression when he tried to explain. How he'd held back. How he hadn't fought for validation, or raised his voice to be heard, because he didn't have to. Darius had already known Chase wouldn't listen. Chase folded the paper slowly, the edges trembling in his grip. He looked up again. Darius was already buried back under the hood of the pickup truck, the moment dismissed as if it meant nothing. But to Chase, it meant everything. He stood there for a long while, unsure whether to say something else. Apologize. Again. Ask for a chance to make things right, but nothing came. The silence between them was louder than words. Finally, Chase stepped back. He gave one last glance at the man whose quiet dignity had survived his arrogance, and whose warning had, in its own way, saved his life. Then he walked away. Later that night, Chase sat in his room, the inspection note in his hand. It felt heavier than it should have. A single line that echoed louder than any lecture, louder than the roar of the engine before the explosion. Maybe now you'll learn to listen. He thought about how Darius had carried himself. No theatrics, no retaliation. Just a man who let truth speak for itself. A man who'd seen enough of the world to know some people only change after the fire. Chase looked at his own reflection in the mirror. He didn't recognize the version of himself from a week ago. The boy who believed money made him untouchable, who thought expertise came with a brand name and a fancy diploma. Now he saw someone stripped down, humbled, a little quieter, a little wiser. It wasn't just his car that had been blown apart. It was the illusion that he already knew everything. And in the smoldering silence left behind, a new respect began to grow for the man who had spoken loudest by saying nothing at all. The garage looked different in the morning light, not because anything had changed. The rusted signage still hung crooked above the entrance, the air still smelled of oil and heat, but because Chase Whitmore had changed. Gone were the sunglasses that once screamed entitlement. His usual designer clothes were replaced with a plain gray t-shirt, worn jeans and work boots too new to match the grime around them. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the garage's open bay, arms crossed, watching the small group of high school students huddled around an engine block with tools in hand. Darius stood nearby, calm as ever, giving instructions in that low, firm voice of his. No rush. If you don't understand what you're fixing, you're not fixing anything. The students nodded, some scribbling notes, others fumbling with socket wrenches. One of them, a nervous-looking kid with oil-smudged glasses, asked a question. Darius didn't answer immediately. He looked at Chase. You want to explain it? The question hung in the air for a beat longer than expected. Chase hesitated, then stepped forward. He knelt beside the student and pointed to the exposed manifold. You see that gasket? He said, his tone slower, more grounded than it had been weeks ago. It seals this chamber here. If it's worn, you're going to get pressure leaks. That's probably why it's misfiring. The student blinked, then smiled with sudden understanding. Chase smiled back, just a little. Darius watched, in silence. Then he gave a small nod, not dramatic, not performative. Just enough to be noticed, just enough to mean something. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't friendship, but it was respect. The kind earned, not given. The trade program was run out of a borrowed community center room across town. Once a week, kids from the local school came to learn hands-on skills from professionals like Darius. He'd been volunteering there for years, never asking for recognition. Now Chase showed up every Wednesday afternoon. He didn't brag about it, didn't tell his friends, didn't post about it online. Most of them still thought he was just laying low after the accident, that he'd be back in his sports car and his ego by summer. But the truth was different. Chase spent his mornings at the auto parts store, his afternoons at the garage, and his evenings reading through old mechanic manuals. He was starting over, from the ground up. Sometimes Darius would hand him a complicated repair and walk away, leaving him to figure it out. Chase didn't complain, he took his time. And more often than not, he got it right. At first, the other mechanics had been skeptical. They remembered the smug kid who once laughed about backyard mechanics. But that kid was gone. The one who remained was quieter, hungrier, willing to scrub the floor without being asked, willing to listen. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the heat finally began to break, Darius sat on a folding chair beside the open bay, sipping iced tea from a thermos. Chase was wiping his hands after finishing a brake replacement job, grease on his face, arms sore. He walked over and sat down next to Darius without asking. They sat in silence for a while, watching the last car pull out of the lot. You knew. That car was gonna blow, Chase said finally, voice steady. Darius didn't look at him. I suspected. That fuel line wasn't just cracked, it was hanging on by a prayer. Why didn't you push harder? Darius took a slow sip. You weren't ready to listen. Chase nodded, accepting it now without defensiveness. I get it. I don't like teaching through pain, Darius said after a moment. But some folks don't learn any other way. Chase looked down at his boots. I was one of them. Darius finally turned to look at him. Not unkindly, just honest. You were. And that was it. No apology. No dramatic reconciliation. Just the truth and the space between two men finally narrowing, inch by hard-earned inch. Later that week, after the students had packed up and the garage lights were dimmed, Chase stayed behind to sweep the floor. He wasn't asked. He just did it. As he worked, he passed by the old inspection report still pinned to the corkboard near the tool wall. The red ink was faded now, but the handwritten note remained. I warned you without speaking. Maybe now you'll learn to listen, Itai. smiled to himself. This time it didn't sting. It reminded him not of failure, but of where the real learning began. Outside, Darius locked the gate and turned to Chase. "Same time next week?" Chase nodded. "Wouldn't miss it?" For the first time, Darius offered a small smile. It was enough. In the stillness of late afternoon, long after the last engine had cooled and the sun dipped low enough to cast golden slants across the concrete, the garage fell quiet. Not silent, just peacefully quiet. The kind of quiet that follows growth, like soil left soft and open after a heavy rain. Darius stood near the back wall, sorting through a tray of spark plugs. His hands moved with instinctive care, each piece turned with reverence only a craftsman could give. The garage lights buzzed above him, and outside the distant sound of a lawnmower hummed through the summer air. Behind him, Chase swept the far corner of the shop. There was no music playing, no chatter, just the soft scrape of the broom bristles and the rhythm of a day winding down. But the quiet said more than words ever could. It spoke of mistakes made and understood, of lessons that took longer to land but sank deeper because of it. It spoke of a boy slowly becoming a man, not because someone yelled at him or mocked him or demanded he be better, but because someone showed him what better looked like and then let him find his own way to it. Chase had learned the hardest truth, that wisdom doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't need to wave credentials or wear a name brand. It sits steady in the background, waiting to be recognized by those ready to listen. And finally, he had listened. Weeks earlier, Chase wouldn't have noticed a loose bolt or a rattle in the engine timing. Now, he could feel a problem before it showed itself. He understood what Darius meant when he said, "A car's not just parts, it's rhythm." But it wasn't just cars Chase was learning about. It was people. It was silence. It was presence. He noticed things now. How Darius checked the back door twice, not because he forgot, but because security had become a ritual. How the old calendar on the wall had a photo of an engine from the 90s, but Darius had never replaced it. How he never raised his voice, but somehow always commanded the room. One day, when a student snapped a socket wrench and cursed under his breath, Darius didn't flinch. He just walked over, picked up the tool, and said quietly, "Respect the process. It'll respect you back." Chase had filed that one away, and not just for cars. At home, things were changing too. Chase's father, used to his son returning with receipts for modifications and tickets from reckless driving, was surprised. When he came home greasy, tired, and thoughtful, "You fixed something?" his father had asked one night. Chase had shrugged. "Mostly myself." They didn't talk much after that, but the silence between them no longer felt like a wall, more like a pause between chords. One Saturday, Chase lingered behind after the garage closed. Darius was closing the tool cabinet, the metallic clinks echoing gently. Chase cleared his throat. "You ever think about going back to Detroit? To engineering?" Darius didn't look up. "Used to." And now? Darius turned. His eyes held something more complex than just reflection, something like peace. "I still build," he said. "Just looks different now." Chase nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I get that." He did. Because Darius wasn't just repairing engines. He was shaping people, quietly, precisely, like tuning a carburetor just right. Later, Chase sat on the curb outside the garage, wiping his hands with a rag, watching the streetlights flicker on. He thought about the explosion, about the smoke, the fire, the terrifying silence after. It had scared him. Not just because he'd almost lost his car, but because it cracked the shell of invincibility he'd wrapped around himself. He'd thought pride would protect him. That money made him untouchable. But in the end, it was humility that saved him. The humility to come back, to ask, to learn. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded inspection report Darius had once handed him. It was creased now, oil-stained and worn, but the handwritten note still stood out at the bottom. "I warned you without speaking. Maybe now you'll learn to listen." He had. Not just to that note, but to everything Darius had not said. As the final rays of sunlight stretched across the quiet street, The scene framed itself like a quiet testament. Two men, one younger, still learning, one older, still teaching. No grand speeches, no dramatic hugs, just work, rhythm, and a quiet respect between them. Because that's how true wisdom works. It doesn't shout. It doesn't seek credit. It simply stands where it is, steady, patient, and waits for pride to tire itself out. And when it finally does, it's still there, ready to be heard. Moral of the story: true wisdom isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove itself, only to be heard. Pride may roar, but humility learns and survives.